Ex-husband cornered the ex-wife at the charity gala until a hidden patron overturned his pride. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main characters. It was a lavish night at the Grand Rosewood Hotel, where the charity gala of the year was taking place. The ballroom was alive with the hum of chatter, the clinking of glasses, and the shimmering gold and silver decor. But in the midst of all the glitter and elegance, there was a tension in the air, one that could be felt by anyone who paid attention. James, tall and impeccably dressed in a sharp black suit, scanned the room. His eyes, a shade too cold for the evening, were focused on one person, his ex-wife, Emily. She stood near the grand chandelier, a vision of grace in a deep red gown. Her blonde hair cascaded down her back in soft waves, and her smile was effortlessly charming as she exchanged pleasantries with some of the gala's most influential guests. But beneath the polished exterior, Emily's eyes betrayed her. There was a quiet storm within her, a storm that James was all too familiar with. They hadn't spoken much since their divorce, a separation that was both messy and public. For months, James had watched Emily move on with her life, growing stronger, more confident in ways that made him seethe. Tonight, he couldn't let it slide. Tonight, he would make her feel small. As the evening wore on, James slowly made his way toward Emily, a calculated smile on his face. He was determined to remind her of who she used to be, the woman who depended on him, the woman who could never stand on her own without his help. "Emily," he said, his voice smooth as he reached her side. "I see you've done well for yourself. I must admit, I'm surprised you're still able to make it to events like this after everything." Emily turned to him, her smile faltering. Just for a moment. She kept her composure though, giving him a polite nod. "James," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm here for the cause, just like everyone else." She stepped away, her eyes scanning the crowd for someone else to engage with. But James wasn't done yet. He followed her, staying close but never too close. He made sure his presence was known, subtly cornering her with his words, his actions, and the way he loomed in the background of every conversation she tried to start. Emily felt the familiar weight of his gaze, the uncomfortable pressure that came from his unspoken attempts to remind her of her place in his world. She wasn't going to let him control her though. Not tonight. But as the night went on, something unexpected happened. A figure from the shadows moved closer, someone watching from the edges of the room. This person, a quiet observer of the entire scene, knew exactly what was unfolding, and wasn't about to let James have the final word. As the night continued, the soft hum of conversation surrounded James and Emily, but the tension between them remained palpable. James, ever so methodical, continued to hover around Emily, making sure she couldn't escape his presence. His words, though polite, carried a subtle bite, as if he was trying to push her into a corner without anyone noticing. Emily, however, wasn't the same woman who had once been intimidated by his subtle manipulations. She had changed. The divorce had been difficult, yes, but it had also been liberating. She had found herself again, found the strength to stand on her own. Still, the sting of James' presence was undeniable. She could feel his eyes on her, and the weight of his words hung in the air, pressing down on her chest. But Emily refused to show weakness. She smiled, nodded, and continued engaging with the guests around her. She knew the kind of person James was, and she was determined not to let him take her down that easy road of doubt and insecurity. James wasn't used to being ignored. He had always been the center of attention, the one who controlled the narrative, in their relationship. But tonight, Emily was taking back control. It was subtle at first, the way she deflected his barbs, the way she avoided his attempts to pull her back into their past. But James wasn't ready to let go. He had one more trick up his sleeve. As the evening drew on, the lights dimmed slightly to create an even more intimate atmosphere. Guests began to settle into the evening's rhythm, with some dancing, others engaging in deep conversations. Emily, who had been holding herself together so well, felt the moments slipping. She could feel James closing in, his presence more suffocating now than ever before. She was trying to maintain her composure, trying to keep the facade of calm, but she was struggling. And that's when it happened. From across the room, a figure moved in. At first, Emily didn't notice, caught up in trying to navigate James' constant attempts to pull her back into his orbit. But as the figure approached, she felt a sudden shift in the air. It wasn't just a person, it was a presence. This person, with calm authority, approached James and Emily. It was as if the crowd parted just enough to give this figure the space to enter the fray. The figure was dressed in a dark suit, simple but elegant, and carried themselves with an aura of confidence that was hard to ignore. Emily couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. She didn't know who this person was, but there was something about them that made her feel like everything was going to be all right. James, on the other hand, didn't notice the shift at first. He was too focused on Emily, too determined to make his mark on the night. But as the figure moved closer, James became aware of the change in the atmosphere. He turned, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the stranger now standing beside him. The stranger, calm and composed, stood between James and Emily, effectively blocking James from continuing his barrage of subtle insults. Emily, still caught off guard by this intervention, took a breath and found herself exhaling with relief. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't fighting this battle by herself. The hidden patron had arrived. Who they were and what their purpose was remained a mystery, but in that moment, Emily felt a shift in her fate. James, who had never been challenged like this before, stood frozen for a moment. The pride that had so often defined him seemed to crumble just a little. His eyes flicked between Emily and the mysterious figure, his mind working to process this unexpected turn of events. The silence between James and the mysterious figure grew heavy, as if the room itself held its breath. James glanced from Emily to the stranger, his mind racing. For the first time that evening, he felt uncertain, the confident air he'd carried with him slipping away. He cleared his throat and forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone colder than he intended. The stranger didn't flinch. Instead, they stood tall, unbothered by the question, their eyes locking with his for a moment that felt like an eternity. There was a subtle power in the way they carried themselves, something that commanded respect without needing to raise their voice. Emily watched the exchange, a mix of curiosity and relief washing over her. She had no idea who this person was, but something about their presence made her feel seen, as though she wasn't alone in this battle. The figure's gaze never wavered from James, their posture calm but firm. "I believe you're making her uncomfortable," they said, their voice smooth and deliberate. James blinked, taken aback. He wasn't used to being called out, especially not in front of a crowd. His face flushed slightly, but his pride wouldn't let him show any sign of vulnerability. "I'm just having a conversation with my ex-wife," he responded, his words more defensive than he intended. "We've known each other a long time." The stranger didn't seem convinced. "It doesn't look like a conversation to me," they replied, their voice still calm, but now there was a hint of authority in their tone. Emily's heart beat faster as she watched the interaction unfold. She had never expected someone to intervene, especially not like this. The stranger's presence was like a shield, and for the first time that night, she felt the weight of James' behavior begin to lift. James shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. "I'm not sure who you think you are, but this is none of your business," he said, though there was less conviction in his words now. The figure remained unfazed, almost as if they had anticipated his reaction. "Perhaps," they said quietly, "but it seems to me that it's your pride that's making this personal." James's face darkened. He was used to getting his way, and the idea of someone undermining his authority in front of others was almost more than he could handle. He opened his mouth to retort, but the words didn't come. Instead, he stood there, caught in the moment, his mind struggling to regain control. Emily, still processing the sudden shift in dynamics, felt a sense of empowerment that she hadn't known in years. She had spent so long feeling small, overshadowed by James and his arrogance. But now, with this stranger standing up for her, it was as though the balance was finally tipping in her favor. James, though, wasn't ready to give up so easily. He straightened his back, preparing to face this unexpected challenge head-on. But before he could say another word, the stranger took a step closer, their gaze softening just enough to convey a quiet but firm sense of finality. "This isn't about you anymore," they said, their voice low but filled with resolve. "It's about her." James stood frozen, the weight of their words sinking in, and for the first time that night, he realized he was no longer the one in control. The mysterious figure had shifted the power dynamic, and Emily, with quiet strength, was no longer the person who needed defending. The evening had taken an unexpected turn, and as the crowd continued their conversations around them, it was clear that the power had shifted. Emily had found her voice, and she wasn't about to let anyone take it away again. The tension in the air was almost unbearable as James stood there, his pride bruised but not broken. The stranger's words still echoed in his mind, but he refused to let them defeat him. He had always been the one in control, the one who dictated the course of events. Emily, standing beside him, was a symbol of his past, a past that he believed he could still command. But now, in front of everyone, things were shifting. James turned his attention back to the mysterious figure, his posture stiffening as he tried to regain his composure. "You seem to have a lot to say," he remarked, his voice colder now, a little sharper. "But I don't think you understand what you're interrupting. This is a private matter." The stranger didn't flinch, nor did they seem concerned with James' attempt at dominance. Instead, they looked at him with a quiet but unwavering confidence. "Private?" they repeated, their voice still smooth. "It seems to me that your actions are affecting more than just the two of you. You're not the only one in this room, James." Emily, still standing to the side, felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. She had spent so many years walking on eggshells around James, always trying to please him, always trying to avoid confrontation. But tonight was different. The stranger's intervention gave her the space she needed to see James for who he really was. No longer the man who controlled her, but just a man, vulnerable and exposed for the first time in years. The crowd around them continued their conversations, some unaware of the drama unfolding in the corner of the room. But Emily knew. She knew that the shift in power had already taken place. James, for all his attempts at holding on to control, was losing it bit by bit. The stranger's calmness was like a shield, keeping James from lashing out in the way he so often did. And though Emily wasn't sure who this person was, she couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. She had spent so long feeling small in the presence of her ex-husband, but now, in this moment, she felt large, powerful, and in control of her own destiny. The stranger finally broke the silence, their voice a soft but firm command. "You have a choice, James. You can leave now, or you can stay and let this go. But either way, this conversation is over." For the first time that evening, James hesitated. His eyes flicked from the stranger to Emily, and for a brief moment, he saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen in years: strength, defiance. It was enough to make him pause. He had never liked being challenged, and certainly not in front of others. But this time, something inside him seemed to snap. He turned away, his face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and anger, and walked off into the crowd. Emily exhaled deeply, her shoulders relaxing for the first time that night. She didn't watch him leave, she didn't need to. The battle had been won, and she had found her strength, with the help of a stranger whose name she didn't even know. The room felt lighter, the weight on her chest finally lifting. And for the first time in a long time, Emily could breathe again. It took a few moments for the room to fully settle after James walked off, the crowd resuming their conversations as though nothing had happened. But for Emily, everything had changed. Her heart was still racing, but in a way that felt liberating rather than frantic. She stood there, a quiet smile forming on her lips, as she realized the weight that had been crushing her for years had finally been lifted. She wasn't going to let anyone, especially James, make her feel small anymore. Not after tonight. The stranger, the one who had stepped in to protect her, still stood nearby, but now they seemed to blend into the background. Emily glanced over, catching their eye for the briefest of moments. They gave her a small nod, a silent acknowledgment of the unspoken bond they had just formed. She wanted to thank them, to express the gratitude that was welling up inside her, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. The stranger had done what she couldn't do on her own, not because she was weak, but because sometimes, even the strongest need a little help. Emily turned her attention back to the gala, the energy of the event beginning to feel normal again. The music played softly in the background, the laughter of guests filling the space. But this time, Emily didn't feel like an outsider in her own life. She felt like she belonged. As she moved to join a group of acquaintances, she noticed people giving her subtle smiles, as if they knew something had shifted. The confident woman they saw before them wasn't the same one who had walked in earlier that evening. She was different now, empowered, whole. The night wore on, and Emily found herself laughing and chatting with people she hadn't spoken to in years. She felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in so long. It wasn't just because of James leaving the room in frustration, but because she had realized something important. She was in control of her own story. She had the power to shape her own future. Across the room, she saw the stranger again, standing by the bar, as if they had always been part of the crowd, just another guest at the gala. Emily didn't know who they were, but she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Whoever they were, they had changed the course of her evening, and perhaps, the course of her life. She made a mental note to thank them before the night ended, but for now, she was content to let the evening unfold on her terms. The gala continued without incident, and as Emily looked around, she saw the smiles of people who didn't know the half of what had just transpired. It didn't matter. She had found her strength, and that was all that mattered. The night was hers now. As the evening continued, Emily found herself basking in the warmth of the newfound freedom she felt. The weight of the past seemed to melt away, replaced by a sense of calm and clarity that she hadn't experienced in a long time. The gala around her was still in full swing, but for Emily, it felt like the entire world had shifted. No longer was she defined by her past with James. She was standing on her own, confident, and in control of her life. As she mingled with the other guests, the subtle, lingering glances of approval from those around her did not go unnoticed. She had always been a part of this world, but now, she was participating in it as an equal, not as someone who had to shrink into the background or constantly navigate the expectations of others. The mysterious stranger who had stepped in to help her earlier was still in the room, but now they were part of the crowd. Emily hadn't seen them leave and didn't know if they planned to stay or slip away quietly. She felt a strange sense of gratitude toward them, even though they had never asked for thanks. They had given her something priceless, her own sense of agency. She continued her conversations, but her mind kept drifting back to the stranger. Who were they? Why had they chosen to intervene? It didn't matter. What mattered was that they had, and in doing so, they had sparked something inside her. By the time the gala was winding down, Emily had made several connections, rekindled old friendships, and even received a few invitations for future events. Her phone buzzed with notifications, but she didn't feel the rush to check it, as she had before. She was present in the moment, enjoying her own company and the company of those around her. She could feel the presence of James even without looking for him. He hadn't returned to the event, and that fact made Emily smile to herself. She wasn't waiting for him anymore. The person who had once controlled so much of her life, who had made her feel small and insignificant, was now a distant memory. Emily glanced toward the door, hoping to catch a glimpse of the stranger one more time. She didn't see them. They had likely left, slipping away into the night as quietly as they had come. A part of Emily wished she could thank them, but she also realized that the gift they had given her couldn't be expressed in words. It was a new beginning, one that had started the moment she realized she didn't need anyone to stand up for her. She had the strength to do it herself. As the last of the guests began to trickle out, Emily lingered, savoring the peace she felt. The night had not gone as expected, but in some ways, it had been exactly what she needed. It wasn't about the gala or the people there, it was about her. She was free, and for the first time in years, she was excited about what came next. As the last of the guests began to leave, Emily stood by the grand staircase, her hand resting on the polished banister, savoring the sense of calm that had settled over her. The soft hum of the evening's final conversations echoed through the ballroom, but she wasn't in a rush to leave. The world outside still seemed distant, and in that moment, Emily felt like she was at the center of her own life, finally in control. The soft click of heels on the marble floor caught her attention, and she turned to see the figure who had intervened earlier. The stranger, still dressed in their simple yet elegant dark suit, moved through the room with quiet grace. Emily's heart fluttered, a sudden surge of gratitude overwhelming her once more. She didn't know why, but she had to thank them. She had to know who they were. As the stranger passed by, Emily stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Excuse me," she called out, and the stranger stopped, turning toward her. I want to thank you. You helped me more than you know tonight." The stranger smiled, a small, knowing smile that didn't require words. "It was nothing," they replied softly, their voice just as calm as before. "It was something," Emily insisted, taking a step closer. "You gave me a chance to stand up for myself when I couldn't. And I'll never forget that." The stranger nodded, as if understanding exactly what she meant, before giving a quiet shrug. "Sometimes it's not about doing the big things," they said, their tone thoughtful. "It's about knowing when someone needs a little help to find their own strength." Emily looked at them for a long moment, the weight of their words sinking in. She wasn't sure why this person had chosen to intervene, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that they had reminded her of something she had almost forgotten, that she had the power to stand tall, even when the world seemed determined to make her shrink. "I hope you know how much this meant to me," Emily said, her voice soft but sincere. The stranger's smile grew, their eyes twinkling with a kind of quiet satisfaction. "I'm glad I could help," they said simply. "But you've always had the strength, Emily. It was just waiting for you to see it." Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest at their words. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and she could finally see herself for who she truly was, not the person defined by her past with James, not the woman who had spent too many years in the shadows. She was Emily, strong and capable, and she could navigate the world on her own terms. The stranger turned to leave, but before they did, they gave her one last look. "Take care of yourself," they said softly, their voice carrying the weight of genuine care. Emily nodded, watching as the figure disappeared into the crowd, blending in with the final few guests who lingered at the event. She stood there for a moment, reflecting on everything that had happened. The evening had started with uncertainty, with a sense of being overwhelmed by her past, but it had ended with something entirely different. Emily felt like she had reclaimed her life. She was no longer someone's shadow, no longer bound by expectations or control. As she walked out of the ballroom, she could feel the cool night air on her skin, a reminder that a new chapter was waiting for her. And this time, she was the one writing the story. As Emily stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of the evening seemed to lift off her shoulders, leaving her with a deep sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The stars above twinkled in the clear sky, the city lights below casting a soft glow on the streets. It was a quiet contrast to the bustling energy of the gala, but it felt right. She had always been someone who enjoyed the calm after the storm, and tonight, the calm was hers to embrace. She walked slowly down the steps of the Grand Rosewood Hotel, the sound of her heels tapping gently against the pavement. The air was crisp, and she breathed it in, feeling a sense of renewal with each breath. It was as if the entire night had been a turning point, a moment where everything shifted. For the first time in years, Emily didn't feel tethered to her past. She didn't feel like she was carrying the weight of someone else's expectations. She was free. She stopped for a moment at the bottom of the steps, looking around the quiet street. She had come to the gala expecting nothing more than to honor a cause, but she had left with something far more valuable: herself. The figure who had helped her, the stranger who had stepped in when she needed it most, had given her more than just a moment of support. They had given her the clarity to see that she was more than her history, more than the relationships that had tried to define her. She was a woman capable of standing on her own, and that was a realization that would stay with her forever. As she walked down the street, Emily felt a new sense of purpose. There was so much she wanted to do, so much she still had to explore and accomplish. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. She was excited. It was an empowering feeling, knowing that the road ahead was hers to shape. As she turned the corner, Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a message from an old friend she hadn't spoken to in a while. It was a simple message, just checking in, but it made her smile. She realized that, in the midst of everything that had happened that night, she had forgotten to truly connect with those who cared about her. She quickly typed a reply, letting her friend know that she was doing well and that she had just had one of the most unexpected, but meaningful, nights of her life. She hit send, feeling lighter than she had in years. The message wasn't just a reply to an old friend, it was a reminder to herself that she had a support system. She wasn't alone. The night was still young, and Emily could feel the weight of the past slipping further away with every step. She wasn't the same person who had walked into the gala hours ago. She was stronger, more self-assured, and ready for whatever came next. The city around her buzzed with life, but in that moment, Emily was at peace with herself. She was ready for the next chapter, whatever it might bring. And this time, she was going to face it head-on, with a confidence she had never known before. The following days passed by in a blur, but Emily felt something in herself shift permanently. She woke up each morning with a sense of clarity, the kind she hadn't felt in years. The weight that had once clouded her mind was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of strength that anchored her. It wasn't just about surviving the moments that once held her back. It was about thriving in them. She had come to realize that the choices she made from this point on were hers and hers alone. The strength she had felt that night at the gala, standing up for herself, no longer letting anyone take away her voice, had become a part of her. She found herself more confident in her decisions, whether they were small ones like what to have for lunch, or bigger ones like the direction her life was going to take. One afternoon, Emily decided to revisit the place where it all started, the Grand Rosewood Hotel. Not for any specific reason, but simply because it felt like the right place to reflect on everything that had changed. As she walked through the grand doors, she was reminded of the night she had stood in the same spot, feeling lost and unsure. But now, the hotel seemed different to her. She wasn't the same person who had entered it weeks ago. She was no longer hiding behind anyone or anything. Emily found a seat in the hotel's cozy cafe, the soft buzz of conversation around her providing a comfortable backdrop. She ordered a coffee, then sat back, letting her mind wander. She thought about the stranger, the one who had stepped in when she needed someone to stand up for her. She still didn't know who they were, but their words had stuck with her. It's not about doing the big things. It's about knowing when someone needs a little help to find their own strength. Those words had changed her perspective. She had never thought of herself as someone who needed help, but that night, it hadn't been about weakness, it had been about being reminded of her own power. As the days went on, Emily took more time to nurture herself. She reconnected with old friends, spent more time on things that brought her joy, and finally started pursuing the things she had always put on the back burner. One of those things was art. She had always loved to paint but had let it slip away during the chaos of her past life. Now, it became a new passion, a way for her to express herself freely. It wasn't long before she started showcasing her work at local galleries, feeling a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in a long time. Each day, she moved forward, not dwelling on what had been, but embracing the possibilities of what could be. Her confidence grew with every step. She was building a future, piece by piece, that reflected who she was becoming, not who she had been. Looking back, Emily realized that the night at the gala wasn't just an event. It was the turning point that set her on the path to discovering her true strength. She was no longer defined by her past. She had taken control of her story, and with every new chapter, she was becoming more and more the person she was always meant to be.